Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Access Granted. I'm your host, Grant Chachere, and of course, we have a lot to talk about as football season is. Well, actually, I was going to say slowly, but it's quickly approaching us. I just keep forgetting that week zero starts tomorrow in college football, and of course, pro football starts in a couple weeks, and high school football down here in Louisiana starts next week. But LSU. If you guys haven't saw on social media or heard the news, but LSU recently awarded their number 7, number 18 jerseys. We knew it was coming in a number of days as the season was getting closer, but then also Brian Kelly mentioned at his press conference that they were going to announce the who was going to get the number 18 jerseys, and the overall favorite was Josh Williams. He's been there for 6 years. He's along with John Emery are the two last members of the 2019 national championship team. So he's been there for quite a bit, but he's also grown as a leader. He's been a steady presence in this LSU offense the last couple of years. He's also like the leader, one of the leaders, not only of the offense but the whole team. So it's no shocker that he was able to get it. I think he's gonna have a pretty big year. Maybe not like I don't think he's going to rush for over 1,000 yards, but he's somebody that is an effective short yardage runner. But then he's also an excellent player when it comes to the passing game, as he can both pass block and also catch out of the backfield effectively. So he got the number 18. The other number 18 was awarded to Greg Penn, which is also no surprise there. There could have been a number of players that probably could get number 18, but if you had to look at the defense, it's no shocker that Greg Penn was able to get number 18, just due to the fact that he is the only senior of that defense. He is somebody that was second on the team in tackles last year, and he improved, in all of his stats. I know he had at least 2.5 sacks last season for LSU. Then he also had like 3 interceptions. Let me double check that actually. Yeah, so he had 82 total tackles. 33 of them which were solo. He had 3 sacks, and 2 interceptions, and also 1 pass deflected. So he had a pretty big year last year for LSU, and I think he's actually the most underrated player on this LSU defense. Just given what he brings to the table. And then also, he is the guy who has the green dot on the defense. The green dot, of course, is what DNC has allowed players and coaches to communicate with each other differently by means of technology, similar to what the NFL uses. So, and he's the one that has it. And that just shows you, what type of player he is. Blake Baker trusts him to communicate with the rest of the guys. Through the green dot, and so I think that's it's not a shocker that he get number 18. I wasn't sure how they're going to do it because usually they give one out, but I know the last couple of years they've been giving it both offense and defense. But it's no shocker that Greg Penn got number 18. Of course, for number 7, Will Campbell has that, even though he's number 66, he has the number 7 patch, number 7 badge on the back of his helmet. So even though he's listed number 66, in actuality, he's really the number 7, which is given to the most outstanding player from Louisiana. So he's the number 7 on offense. On defense, it's actually Harold Perkins. Now, Harold Perkins, of course, is from Houston. He spent most of his life in Houston, but on LSU's roster, he's listed as being from New Orleans. The reason for that is because his whole family's from New Orleans. He's a Katrina baby. So his family evacuated to Houston during Katrina, and so that's why he's listed as New Orleans. I mean, even though he grew up in Houston, he identifies with being from New Orleans because a lot of times when like for example, for myself, I used to move around a lot, and a lot of times I just say from New Orleans, even though most of my childhood I actually lived in different places. I grew up in New Orleans for the first 6 to 7 years of my life, and then also my whole family's from New Orleans, and we're just very proud of being from New Orleans. So I can see why Harold Perkins lists himself as being from New Orleans, and so that's why he was given number 7, despite growing up most of his life in Houston. But he was awarded with the number 7. So congrats to all those guys for being given the numbers. I'll say this. I'm not a really big fan of number 7. I just think it's kind of manufactured and some stuff. Not number 18 is manufactured as well, but number 18 also means that you're the leader of the team. Given if you look at some of the past guys who were number 18, they were seen as one of the team leaders. So I understand the concept of number 18. But number 7 is kind of like, I feel like it's kind of manufactured because so many good players have worn number 7. Doesn't mean just because a guy has looked good in fall camp doesn't mean they should be given number 7. But I understand why they give it out. That's just my opinion. Some people, of course, will disagree with me there, but that's just how I feel about it. But congrats to all of those guys. But let's talk about what Brian Kelly said at the press conference. On Wednesday was the last practice where the media was allowed to attend. They were supposed to have one on the last one was actually supposed to be on Saturday, but they decided not to have it. And so Brian Kelly's press conference, which was supposed to be after the scrimmage at Tiger Stadium on Saturday, got moved to Wednesday. And I think that's a good thing, just because I felt like last year when they had the scrimmage, I think that there's a little bit too much information being brought out of the fold. And I'm not sure if Florida State used advantage or not. I'm not sure how much information the Florida State was able to use. But I think, you're trying to limit as much information about this LSU team as possible heading into the game, because the scrimmage is where they really start installing most of their stuff, right? And especially in a kind of a game situation. Usually we've been able to see like 7-on-7s and like one-on-one stuff. And then at the very end, they'll have 11-on-11, but the 11-on-11s, they have it actually on the opposite side of the field, where it's kind of hard to see who's what and what they're doing in some shape or another. But Tiger Stadium, the scrimmage Tiger Stadium is really where you get to see everything. So I think LSU is trying to limit as much information as possible going into this very, very important game that could determine how LSU finishes their season. So, but anyway, there was a few things that Brian Kelly mentioned I thought that were very interesting. First, starting with the defensive backfield. This is actually a question I asked. And I remember asking about some of the young defensive backs, including P.J. Woodland and Asher Stamps, and, how important it is for them to step up. And one of the things he mentioned when he answered that question was the consistency. He sees the potential of the defensive backfield, so does everybody else. But it's a matter of consistency. So when I asked him about the defensive backfield again, he feels that they're a lot more consistent now than they were at the beginning of fall camp, which is great progress. And also, that's something you want to hear, especially going against a USC offense that will throw for 300 yards a game, I feel like, this year, just because Lincoln Riley's offenses have always been phenomenal. They have always has been. When he's the offensive coordinator at East Carolina, and then also when he's the offensive coordinator early on when he was at Oklahoma before becoming the head coach, their offenses were fantastic. He completely changed their whole offense, and then became the head coach of Oklahoma, and then USC, and of course, we all know about his offenses with Caleb Williams, Jalen Hurts, Kyler Murray, Baker Mayfield. The list goes on. Just the amount of quarterbacks that have gone that have done great things for when they played under Lincoln Riley. But he feels a lot. But Brian Kelly, as I mentioned, he feels a lot more confident about this defensive backfield, and so here he is right now answering my question about the defensive backfield.
I think I commented on this before. I think what I like the most is we're playing the ball well down the field. There are deflected balls. There's balls that we're competing for. And we simply don't have those what the heck, what happened out here? Why is somebody, wide open down the field? We're not having blown coverages. There's certainly a much more consistent approach to what we're doing on the back end of our defense. And like you said, part of that is there's some more maturity back there, some more veteran play. And I think coupled with the fact that, we're getting consistency out there, I see it, and I know Blake and Corey and Jake see a much more consistent unit on the back end.
Another thing that was pretty interesting was when somebody asked about Harold Perkins and how well he's adjusted to playing the inside backer. This was a kind of a topic that was kind of debated on really since last year when they decided to move him to inside backer, play a little bit more inside backer. And I felt like that the defensive coaching staff last year, especially defensive coordinator, the previous defensive coordinator, Matt House, I think they had the right idea of moving Harold Perkins inside because that's what he's going to play in the NFL. So you want to develop him on the inside so he prepares him for the NFL. But at the same time, I felt like that, and really I think a lot of people felt like this too, is that, yes, we like him on the inside, but they weren't using him in the right way on the inside. You still have to have him cause havoc in the backfield. You have to blitz him. You have to move him around to give different looks. I mean, Harold Perkins, yes, he had a great year last year. Yeah, even though his stats weren't the same as his freshman year, he still had a great year. But it's also a matter of how is he helping the team, right? How is he helping the team? Because we all know Harold Perkins can do great things, but if you're taking him out, what can make your defense better, then you're not putting him in the right position to succeed, and that's also effectively hurting the team. Brian Kelly, but he's looked great in the inside. I mean, I feel like Blake Baker is effectively using him as a will. He's blitzing. They're keeping on. Sometimes he might be on the inside. Sometimes he might be on the outside. Sometimes he blitz. Sometimes he's acting like he's going to blitz, but then he jogs back to pass coverage. So they're disguising, the coverage, disguising their blitzes pretty well. It's not just Harold Perkins; it's also Wet Weeks and Major Burns is also getting some blitzing action. He's looked fantastic at that as well. Greg Penn, but I think that's very important considering the fact that you have a guy like Harold Perkins. You need to use him the right way, and also he's been almost impossible for this offensive line to block when he does blitz, and that's saying something because LSU's offensive line, of course, is considered to be, if not the best offensive line in the country, one of the best. So here's Brian Kelly talking about Harold Perkins and how he's improved his game to the point where he's elevating other players.
I'm having a hard time blocking him, and we've got a pretty good offensive line. I think the best thing that I could say about a player, regardless of the position in which they play, is that he has elevated the players around him. I couldn't say that about Harold his first 2 years. He did not elevate the players around him. His play was elevated, right? At times it was outstanding. He is now entering into that category of elevating the players around him. That's a pretty good thing for Tiger fans.
And another interesting thing he mentioned was the backup quarterback battle. And that's usually kind of weird to talk about during the offseason or the preseason, which is where who's going to win the backup quarterback battle. Usually it's the starter, right? I think that's the one that's the juicy topic, whenever it comes to covering a football team, whether it's high school, college, or professional, just who's going to be the guy under center. It's usually not the backup quarterback job, but in this case for LSU, it is. You need somebody to back up Garrett Nussmeier in case he gets hurt, because right now they don't really have that guy where they're like, oh yeah, let's put this guy in to back up Garrett Nussmeier in case he gets hurt. Right now it's one guy who is 17 years old and probably like right now, like a lot of seniors in high school should be studying for their first test or quiz or whatever because school started across the country. You have another guy who's a sophomore who really hasn't got that much playing time even last year because they were trying to give Garrett Nussmeier some time because they knew he was going to be the guy eventually behind Jane Daniels. And then you also have another guy who was a starter at Vanderbilt. And yes, that is beneficial that he was able to start at a place like Vanderbilt, which is in the SEC. So he's accustomed to playing in those tough SEC environments. He's tough to play against those tough SEC defenses. But he's still kind of improving because we're not sure how much of his struggles were him being on Vandy, being the quarterback for Vandy, which doesn't really have that much talent at all, or was he just not that good? And right now, there really hasn't been any separation between AJ Swan, who's the guy from Vanderbilt I'm talking about, and the sophomore quarterback Ricky Collins, who I mentioned really hasn't gotten that much playing experience because he had to sit behind not only Jane Daniels but also Darren Nussmeier. So it's a very interesting thing right now. Right, I would say Ricky Collins has played better than AJ Swan. Ricky Collins' arm is livelier. He's taking chances. AJ Swan's more of a kind of like a check down Andy in a sense. But at the same time, every time, it's going to be Ricky Collins. Ricky Collins doesn't really have the best of practices. And then every time it's like, okay, it's going to be AJ Swan, who I think may be this backup quarterback when it's all said and done, because as I just mentioned, he's familiar with the SEC. He knows the defenses. He knows the hostile environments, unlike, a guy like Ricky Collins. But like I said, he's not really taking as many chances as Ricky is. And he's had some bad practices as well. So there really hasn't been that much separation between the two. But it's also interesting that in Brian Kelly's press conference that he mentioned that Colin Hurley's entered the race. Colin Hurley has looked awesome, even though he's 17 years old. And like I said, should be studying probably for like his first quiz or test of the year because he should be a senior in high school. He's looked good. But the only issue with that is that he's 17 years old. You're throwing out a 17-year-old. Let's just say, hypothetically speaking, you're in the swamp, right? Or Kyle Field, or in Texas A&M. What happens if Gary Nussmeier gets hurt and you throw out a 17-year-old quarterback? I mean, that's going to be a major culture shock. That would be like putting a seal in a tank full of great white sharks. That is something that is not the ideal situation for anybody who's 17 years old. But anyway, here's what Brian Kelly had to say about the quarterback battle and Colin Hurley, as I just mentioned. And here's his thoughts.
I think we're making some progress there. I thought we kind of got into a lull last week where, I felt like it was, pretty, inconsistent. I think we're starting to. Maybe it's the sense of urgency that we're getting closer to the season. Look, the backup quarterback, let me just say this about that position. When you know that you're playing for the number 2, you have to do a great job mentally, first of all, to kind of settle yourself. Because everybody wants to be the starter. And I think that there was a little bit of a mental struggle in terms of getting in the right place and the mindset of, hey, I'm the number 2. How do I handle myself? And I think a little bit of that was going on last week. I've seen improved play this week from, both of those guys and, Colin Hurley as well. I think Colin kind of came in thinking, well, I'm the number 3. And now he's like, you know what, why can't I throw my hat in the ring here too? So this week has been very competitive with Ricky, AJ, and Colin, and I kind of feel a lot better than I did at this time when the question was asked about the number 2. We're not there yet, but we're making some progress, and I'm happy to report that we're seeing the kind of signs that we need from the 3 of those guys.
Yeah, and just that kind of wraps up the recap from Brian Kelly's press conference, which would be the last press conference of fall camp. And then next Monday, he will have his pre-USC press conference. And I can't wait to go to that because it's good to hear his perspective of how the team's looking going into the game. We'll go more and more into game recap. Game preview. But then also, it's just like, when you have those Monday press conferences, that means the season is effectively underway. So I'll be very excited to go to that Monday and hear his thoughts about, once again, how the team's looking, what to expect from USC, what to expect from LSU going in that game, especially going to a place like Las Vegas on the West Coast, which, if you think about, I mean, a lot of people don't realize how tough it is to play on the West Coast, especially for a school like LSU or anybody who is essentially east of the Mississippi. Um, for reference, Nebraska in the mid 1990s, they'd won back-to-back national championships in 94 in 95. And, they went undefeated in 94 and 95. They went 13-0 1994, and then they went 12-0 in 1995. Their 95 team is considered to be one of the greatest in college football history. I mean, up there with 01 Miami and 01 Miami and obviously 2019 LSU. But Nebraska had only lost one game from 1993 to 1995. 93, the only loss was in the national championship game against Florida State. So in 96, they travel to play Arizona State in Tempe, Arizona, which is in, Tempe's the suburb of Phoenix, for any guys who don't know. And they were the number one team in the country. They had not lost a regular season game since 1992, and they got shut out 19-0. Now, the Arizona State team, of course, ended up being a very good team. They're literally one play away from winning the national championship that year. But that's to say, like, a team that had not lost a regular season game in 3 years gets shut out 19-0. Like, Nebraska ended up winning the Orange Bowl that year, and then 97, they ended up going undefeated and winning the national championship. So that was their only, up to that point, that was only their second loss in 3 years. Their first one in the regular season since 1992, and that would also end up being only their, I believe it, because they ended up losing against Texas in the 96 Big 12 championship. That was only their fourth, at the time, that would have been one of four losses in a 4-year span. And that was the only one that was in like the regular season. That's pre-conference championship. So it's extremely tough to play on the West Coast, whether it's in California, whether it's in Arizona, whether it's in Nevada, whether it's in Washington, Oregon, and a lot of that has to do with the different climates, of course, but then also the time change. Remember, in Nevada, they're going to have it's going to be a 2-hour difference. So let's just say you're trying to go to bed. Let's say, you go to bed around 11 o'clock, 11:30 in Louisiana. It's 9 o'clock, 9:30 over there. So you're basically, you're thinking that, oh, yeah, I'm going to be fine in the morning, but really there's a 2-hour difference. So, that's going to play a factor of sleep, getting the right food, drinking a good bit of water because it's extremely hot in Nevada right now. I remember seeing something like it's in the hundreds right now because it's in the desert, right? So now, luckily, come game time, the sun will be down, so it'll be a little bit cooler because remember it's in the desert, and so everything cools down, which actually feels pretty nice if you have lived in the desert before. I used to live in Arizona, so I know about the temperature changes when it comes to 9-day. So that's going to play a huge factor when it comes to playing against USC in Las Vegas. And this is no cakewalk either. Like, I'm going to say this right now. Don't expect LSU's defense to at least give up 300 yards of passes. I still think they're going to win the game, but when you see USC put up 300 yards, oh, the defense is bad. They're bad once again. It's like, no. USC's offense averages 450, 500 yards a game. Well, a Lincoln Riley offense averages 450 to 500 yards per game every single year. That's a great offense, regardless of who is at the quarterback and who's at the helm, behind center, or who their receivers are, or the running backs, or their offensive line. That offense is going to put up yards. And And really, also, you remember, yeah, you guys got to think about this too. USC and LSU are very similar. Brand new quarterback, but both brand new quarterback, Garrett Nussmeier, and then of course Miller Roster USC, and they both have a lot of potential. Both the offensive lines are pretty damn good. They both have really good receiving cores. Their defenses are very similar in the fact that they both struggled last year, and there's also some new faces. Also there's new faces everywhere, not just on defense for both LSU and USC, but also on offense. So that's something you guys have to think about when it comes to this game. It's not any different. These two teams are not any different from each other. So if people act like LSU is going to blow at USC, you're just wrong. Could it happen? Of course, but that doesn't mean that doesn't mean it is. So you have to keep that in mind because USC is still a good program. They still have a really good head coach, who, even though we probably look down on because he's underachieved during his time at USC and really has underachieved the last 3 or 4 years, going back to Oklahoma. That doesn't mean you look down on Oklahoma or USC because they play in the West Coast or they're all the guys from California or some other reason. Because remember, we also lost by 2 touchdowns against UCLA in California. And by the way, that's another game that needs to come up when it comes to playing on the West Coast and the difficulties of teams from the South or east of the Mississippi going to play on the West Coast. So, we're 8-9 days away from LSU USC kicking off. So those are some things that will be elaborated in the next episode. But I just want to kind of give a kind of a precursor to what the next episode will look like when we're talking about LSU. The next thing I want to talk about is Tulane. I don't remember. So this is probably the first time I'm talking about Tulane football. I've talked about basketball in the past. I think a little bit of baseball. But this is a new podcast, so I want to make sure to Tulane's football team. Well, I actually did talk about Tulane's football team a little bit about their offseason, but I also want to make Tulane a bigger focus now because I think they're a big-time program in the state of Louisiana. Of course, they won the Cotton Bowl 2 years ago, and they've had back-to-back 11-win seasons, which I believe is the first time in their history, if I'm not mistaken. But the reason I want to talk about Tulane today is, there's a lot of things that are expected from Tulane. I mean, they look good. Patrick Jenkins looks good on the defensive line. I mean, there's a lot of big-time players on Tulane that have already been there in the past, and also guys that joined Tulane through the transfer portal. And one of those guys is Ty Thompson, who is competing for the quarterback job. Transferred in from Oregon. I believe he's an Arizona native. And he looked like he was going to be the front runner, just because given his resume, and also he had some experience at Oregon. But then you also have Kai Horn, who was the backup quarterback for Tulane. I believe he played in the bowl game, but he also started the Ole Miss game where he did a decent job. When Michael Pratt was out for the game, and they probably should have won. And really, if Michael Pratt was in the game, I think Tulane would have upset Ole Miss. So, Kai Horn's done some good things. He has experience. He knows the offense. Well, it's a new offense now, but he has experience. So, those are the two guys that we thought were, one of those two was going to win the quarterback battle. But a new name is entered the fold, and that's Darian Mensah. Darian Mensah is a redshirt freshman from the state of California, and from the looks of things, he's been taking a lot of reps in the first team. I've seen some clips of him. He's an athletic runner. He could throw some good balls on the run. And really, Summerall loves him. So every time he's asked about Darian Mensah, his eyes light up and he starts talking a lot of good things about Darian Mensah. That is a guy who looks like maybe the starter. I don't think he'll be the starter at the beginning of the season. I still think that they might rotate quarterbacks at the beginning of the year, especially against a team like Southeastern, and then the very next week. I think they play Kansas State. I believe they play Kansas State, and so I believe the quarterback battle may keep moving forward once we get to the season. But Darian Mensah's really entered the fold. This is a great Tulane team. I think And really, since Tulane runs a spread, I think he might fit the offense better. Ty Thompson's more of a pocket passer, kind of same deal with Kyle Horton. But Darian Mensah gives Tulane's offense a different looks compared to those two because he's an excellent runner. He's a little bit more athletic than the other two, and also especially in the modern day of college football where defensive linemen are just as fast as the running backs and quarterbacks and receivers. It's very important to have a mobile quarterback. And you saw that with Jaden Daniels. I mean, the reason why LSU was able to win a lot more games than probably what they should have, given what their defense brought on the field last year. They must have like quarterback in the country, Jaden Daniels. He was the fastest guy. A lot of times, he was the fastest guy on the field. And if you put in Garrett Nussbaum last year, I think LSU's a 6-16. They're a 500 team. But with Jaden Daniels with the team, they have a chance to win every single game that they can possibly win, despite having their defense give up 700 yards a game. So it's very important to have a mobile quarterback, and I think that's something that John Summerall is keeping into play for Tulane when it comes to Darian Mensah. I wouldn't be surprised if Darian Mensah was the starter. I wouldn't be surprised if Ty Thompson was the starter. I wouldn't be surprised if Kyle Horton is the starter. But the fact that Darian Mensah has risen up this quickly and is taking up first-team reps kind of lets me know that he may be the starter against Southeastern. And if he plays well against Southeastern and looks pretty damn good against Southeastern, he might start against Kansas State, which will be, one of the biggest games in the state. That's also including where LSU is bringing in Ole Miss, Alabama, and Oklahoma into Tiger Stadium. So, and this Tulane Kansas State game might compete with all of them in terms of big games in the state. So that being played in the state of Louisiana, and then also that game will be the 10th anniversary of Yulman Stadium when it opened. So that'll be a pretty big game in Uptown New Orleans. So I'm very excited. Looking forward to that, especially, and also that's the same day as the home opener at LSU. So maybe I could go to both. Who knows? But anyway, that's kind of that kind of wraps up what's going on at Tulane, and we'll talk more about them next week. But before we wrap up the show or the podcast or whatever you want to call it, let's talk about some of the matchups this week. Obviously, there's a lot of cupcake games. You got Kansas playing against Lindenwood. I'm pretty sure you guys don't know who Lindenwood is and where it's even located. I certainly don't know. Well, actually, I think it's in Kansas, actually. I think it's like somewhere in the Midwest. You have Utah and Southern Utah. So, there's a lot of gimme games in week 0. That's kind of a given. Well, actually, no, that's a Thursday. I'm looking at ESPN. ESPN's schedule is always kind of clunky for some. I kind of hate that compared to some other scoreboards. Oh, here we go. So you have Florida State and Georgia Tech. I think that's the big game. You have SMU, Nevada. And that's it. That's it for Saturday because New Mexico plays Montana State. Now, Montana State could easily beat New Mexico. Montana State's actually a pretty good FCS program. So that's actually Montana State's favored by 13.5 points. So I'm not sure how much of an upset that is, but that's something you should watch out for in case you kind of like those FCS over FBS upsets, even though it's not really an upset if Montana State's a favorite by 13.5 points. But first, let's talk about SMU, Nevada. Actually, there's not much to talk about. SMU's going to kill them, so skip that. Let's go to Florida State and Georgia Tech, which will happen at 11 a.m. tomorrow, and we played in the great country of Ireland. Florida State, of course, is number 10 team in the country. They're trying to rebound. It's not so much of a rebound, but last year, of course, the big story with them was that they missed the playoff, even though they finished the regular season undefeated. And they probably would have made the playoff if Jordan Travis is not out for the year with a broken leg. Because they were getting it in, right? But the issue was that they struggled against a pretty bad Florida team, and then the offense was basically non-existent against Louisville in the SEC championship. And of course, Alabama defeated Georgia in the SEC championship game, which is a very impressive win. But then also their only loss was a Texas team at the beginning of the year, and that Texas team ended up going to the playoffs. So their loss, in hindsight, was not a bad loss. It was actually a good loss. Even though not all losses are good, but when it comes to trying to make the college football playoff, if you're going to lose against somebody that's really damn good. And they lost against a Texas team that ended up going to the playoff. So, but Florida State this year will be led by DJ Ugalai. I don't know pronounce his last name. I always call him DJU for that reason because it's hard to pronounce his last name. But he's going to be the quarterback this year. He's an experienced quarterback. He started against Clemson. He was the start, and then he starts for Oregon State, where he actually had a pretty decent year. Now he's in Florida State. And Florida State, of course, they still have some talent on their team, man. They still have some pretty good talent. Now, I know the running game will still be kind of strong. Even though they lose some key guys in rushing attack, their offensive coordinator is their offensive line coach as well. So he's going to try to make the offensive. He's still going to try to make the run game a huge part of this offense. Just given the fact that he is a offensive line coach, along with being a offensive coordinator. But this Florida State team is still going to be pretty good in my opinion. They're the favorite right now to win the ACC. But I really like this Georgia Tech team. I really do. They went, even though they went. I believe they went 7-6 the year before. But I really like how they play. They always play up to. Always been playing up to the competition since Brent Key's taken over. They upset Miami on the road last year. They upset North Carolina on the road. They had a very close game with Georgia, who was the number one team in the country, and they have an experienced quarterback in Haynes King. So I really like. I think Georgia Tech will play a great game. I think this game will actually be a pretty close game. To ACC opponents, and it's also in a neutral site game, so there's really no home field advantage per se. But I still think Florida State is going to pull it off. I think it's going to be a very close game. It's going to come down to a touchdown or less. And I also would not be shocked if Georgia Tech pulled off the upset. So that's my pick because that's the only game, the only real game this weekend. But then next week we'll have a lot more games to pick from. So that would wrap up our show today. And the football season, of course, is officially started. Week 0 is here, so college football season started. And then we got all the good games next week, and then also high school football starting up, and those already starting in some states like Georgia and Florida, I believe. But then high school football in Louisiana will start in 2 weeks. So make sure if you want to check out anything, any updates or any breakdowns of high school football in the state of Louisiana, you can actually we have a podcast on Rougarou Sports Media called Friday Nights on the Bayou. Me and Jace Lejeune break down all the high school teams in the state. We'll break down the games. We'll have some interviews on the show. So if you really if you're a big Louisiana high school football fan, you could tune in. I'll actually leave a link to all of our most recent episodes down below in the description. And then also make sure to like this video, subscribe to Rougarou Sports Media's YouTube channel, and also follow us wherever you get your social media. Those are up top. You'll see our social media handles for Twitter and Instagram. And we're also on Facebook as well. With that being said, I'm your host, Grant Chachere, and I'll see you next time on Access Granted.